Hello, everybody. My name is James Sisti. I am a professional artist and a wilderness guide, and today I'm going to be teaching you how to take a drawing from nature and to digitalize it using a digital tablet. So right here is an XP Pen Deco Fun tablet, and this allows me to draw from the tablet directly into my computer. And while I'm out in nature, I just want to start this off with a caveat here. I'm drawing in these. These are my nature journals. I've been doing this for over a decade, and this is only a small portion of the vast collection I've accumulated over the years. But sometimes when you're drawing out in nature, the weather can turn, or maybe you don't have the supplies that you would normally use back at home. So, what I did was I took a photo of a feather that I started drawing in nature, and I imported it into my computer. And now what we're going to do is we're going to digitalize it, and in a sort of comic book kind of way. I like the way that ink and color looks together. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this pencil drawing that I did out in nature, and I'm going to use this tablet in order to create a digital drawing for it. So let's begin. So here we have Photoshop open. I know that there are a variety of different digital drawing programs out there, but just for simplicity's sake, I'm going to be sticking with Photoshop today. The first thing I want to point out is when creating a new document, I want the resolution to be at 300 uh, pixels per inch. Okay, that's going to give me a high enough resolution where the file isn't going to be too big, but it's also going to have a little bit more flexibility in terms of being able to scale my drawing. So if I want to change the size later, the higher resolution is going to mean that I'm going to be able to have a little bit more flexibility to avoid the blurriness that comes with a lower resolution image. So I'm going to select a landscape and create, okay? And then what I'm going to do is take my photograph, right, from my phone. What I did was I just airdropped it into my MacBook Pro here, and I drop it onto the canvas. Okay, and this is our first layer. And I can scale this photo accordingly in order for it to feel that it snugly fit within the canvas. And then the only other thing I'm going to be doing with this layer is I'm going to go over here and I'm going to select the transparency, the opacity, and the opacity will be 50%. Okay, you can play with that number a little bit, but this is just that I can do my next step, which is to create a new layer, okay, and select a brush. So just to give you a quick demonstration, when you work this way, what you're essentially doing is tracing over a drawing that you've already done. And usually what I do is I begin by selecting a brush, okay, and I want to make sure that the tablet here is configured so that instead of getting just a round circular brush, I have something that interacts with the pressure I put on the tablet here. Okay, so I close that, and just to give you a demo really quick, with 100% pressure, okay, you're going to have a straight line that looks like that. But if you do what I just did and configure it, your pen weight or the amount of pressure you put on the pencil, on the tablet, is going to create line weight variation. So that's something really cool that we want to do. All right, so let's get rid of that. Start a new layer. And my only gripe, right, or one of my only gripes with working with the digital tablet is that you're pretty far removed from handling the paper, right? There's no paper involved at all, so you can't really work with different angles here. You're kind of stuck. So in order to solve for that problem, what I do is I adjust the rotation here because I'm right-handed, and I'm going to zoom in as much as I can, okay? And I'm going to pick an angle that's comfortable for me to work in because the biggest gripe I have is the disconnect between the input and the output, right? It's not like drawing on a piece of paper. So I'm also going to make sure that the brush size is appropriate to get started, and that's about 15 for me, okay? So to get started here, I have my other layer selected, and I'm going to go ahead and begin by just using barely any pressure on the tablet, so I get a nice thin line here. You might be thinking, hey, wait a minute, James, you're drawing on top of another drawing. That's kind of like tracing, right? And you wouldn't be wrong. However, you can manipulate the drawing after the fact, right? So what I have here is some fluff and some fuzz right at the base of the feather here. Let's say I want to accentuate that a little bit. all I have to do is come in here and add a little bit more, or actively edit, as I like to say in my classes, my drawing. So I can come in here and add more fluff, less fluff. Either way, what I'm doing is I'm pressing very, very lightly, and as I get closer to the bottom, I add a little bit more pressure to get that line weight variation. And that's going to make the base of the feather feel a little bit more raggedy than the top. Okay, now some artists they like to work with closed lines. Me, I'm not so concerned with that because when we get into the coloring portion, we're not going to be just dropping a paint bucket in a closed field here like you would normally see with vector art. What we're doing here is it's digital art, but it's also we're working with pixels and not vectors. That's something that um, some artists might find a little bit irksome, but for me it works just fine. I'm not printing these, for example. So here I have a nice little, so the benefits, let's talk about the benefits of drawing with a tablet. Let's say there's something you don't like. You have this history here where you can undo your line work, right? So you can work it a few different ways if you don't want to stick with it. Whereas if you were working with ink, it's down on the page. It's pretty much over at that point. So I can finesse this a little bit, right? I want to get this to look nice and fluffy towards the bottom. The other nice thing is you can erase too. So that's just by, clicking on this eraser tool and getting rid of those little rough edges that you don't need. Or maybe you want to make something thin because it looks thick right now. But, either way. So let's get back into it. So I'm going to kind of sprint ahead and chat with you as I just continue this drawing here. So this blue jay feather, it's not uncommon to find these, by the way, but I love them because they are this beautiful sapphire blue sometimes. It depends on what part of the bird the feather came from. Usually on my nature walks, I don't look for souvenirs to bring home. I just kind of wait for them to present themselves to me. So that way I'm not having a big impact on the place that I'm hiking in. And also, it's just it's a renewable resource here. I'm not like killing the bird to get the feather. It's something that I either find or I don't find, usually on the ground. Sometimes you can wind up finding a bird that has been completely um, either I want to use a nice word here. Let's just say a bigger bird found it first, and that way you can increase the number of feathers in your collection exponentially. But yeah, for this particular specimen, I brought it home and it was just innocently lying on the ground. I'd like to think that nothing bad happened to the bird. So, as I'm working my way towards the tip of this feather here, note that I'm still working at this slightly adjusted angle, okay? And I'm being a little bit inconsistent with the line because I want to show that that each part of the feather has its own unique character, like the tip, for example. It's going to have a nice angle, but it's not going to be something that's as smooth and rigid as the bottom. It's going to have this sort of serrated look, just like that. And then maybe there's a gap in the plumage here. So we have this little gap. Okay, it's not perfectly tracing what I put down there in pencil, but that's fine. That's okay. For the intents and purposes of this demo, that's okay. Now for the bottom part, I'm going to have to adjust my canvas because, again, I'm a righty, and it makes it a lot easier for me to work this way when I'm using a tablet. So I'm just going to adjust the angle here to, again, fit my comfort. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to continue to work my way. And this part's going to be a little bit nicer for me because it is a smoother surface. And what I might consider doing is increasing my brush size a little bit more, maybe up to 20, because you want a thicker line in areas where shadow is present. And that's just best practices when drawing. You want to suggest shadow. And the way to do that is in areas where it's slightly darker, you just want to use a thicker line. Okay, and that's that whole line weight variation thing I was mentioning earlier. Okay, so in this little area down here, it's fine if it looks a little messy. That's the fluffy part. And I'm going to decrease my brush size to about 15 again. And that way I'm going to be able to just more accurately Not perfectly accurately, because again, it is a little tricky to get used to the tablet. But accurately enough, I'm going to include that mid rib section right there. Okay, let's go ahead and work our way from the tip. And sometimes it just can be super aggravating. I get it. So we can try it again and again and again. There we go. Decent. So if you find yourself in a similar situation, make use of that eraser tool. You know, you're not going to lose points. All you have to do is just get in there. And then when you get to that little troubled section, grab your brush tool again. And I'm using hotkeys, by the way. In Photoshop, you can assign hotkeys to certain um, elements of the user interface. So that just allows me to work a little bit faster than if I was to click on every single menu item. All right, so a little rough around the edges, but for the demo today, this kind of gets the point across. Okay, cool. So now that I've gotten this layer, right, let's see what that looks like without the pencil drawing underneath it. Okay, cool. So this is basically an ink drawing now. So how do we add color to this ink drawing? This all involves layers. So at this point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to save, because you should always save your work. And I'm going to basically just call this feather demo. Okay, I'll put that right on my desktop. Okay, cool. So now that we've saved, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create another layer, but this time the layer is going to be underneath the ink drawing. Okay, so that means what I'm going to be able to do now is I'm going to be able to grab a light blue, let's say, from my color palette. Okay. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to select a different kind of brush. I want it to feel fuzzy like this. So I want the pressure to increase the opacity rather than the line weight. Okay. And then what I'm going to do is like maybe 50, maybe 50 as a brush size. So in our earlier layer, one of the tricks I can teach you here is to use the magic wand tool. Okay, so you have an ink drawing, and the magic wand tool will select a portion of that ink drawing, like so. Here's the trick. When you get to this portion, what you want to do is you want to go to, um, you want to basically go to the selection. You want to modify and expand it by just a single pixel. So that way it's going to be directly underneath the black line that we drew. That's crucial. Then what we do is we select the other layer. You can grab the bucket tool if you want to do it that way, or what I like to do is grab the paintbrush tool. Maybe I'll make it 100, the size of the brush. And I'll just come in here with my blue and then deselect. Okay? So what does that look like when you separate the layers? So what I've got here is a blue layer, and I got an ink layer. They're two separate layers. For every layer that you add, you're able to do more with it. For example, if I just want to change the color of this layer, all I have to do is select layer, or rather image. I can go to adjustments and then hue and saturation. Okay, and then what I can do with this hue is change it to any color that I want, and it's not going to affect any other part of the drawing. Okay, just like that. You can also change the saturation and how light or dark you'd like it to be. Okay, but since this is the bluebird feather, I'm happy with it just the way it is. So let's continue. Now, for the parts of the drawing that do not have a, um, let's zoom in a little bit so we can see it, that do not have a closed line, you're not going to be able to use the magic wand tool. Instead, what you can do is decrease the amount of brush size that you have, and you can come in here with your brush, okay, and it might look a little sloppy, but you can always clean that up in post-production. And you know what? Pressure and opacity would work out better here. So what that means is you're going to be able to affect the size and the opacity. It's kind of like an airbrush. See how I'm adding this like texture here? You can have some fun with that, especially when you add other layers on top. If it's not working out for you, no big deal. You don't have to spend more time than is necessary. You can go ahead into your history here and just get rid of it. Okay, that's another thing to do. And another trick, let's see if we can play with some of these media here. We have dry brushes, wet brushes. Maybe we want to play with some dry media here. That would be kind of interesting. Let's say that we want it to feel more like a pastel or a colored pencil, right? We get in here, okay? We can play around with that, and that adds a little bit of texture to our feather, all right? So when it gets down to it, it's all about your preference, right? If you don't like the way that looks, great. Guess what? You can undo that too. This is the area where you should spend the most time experimenting with your brushes. Okay, your brushes are super important, and it's what's going to allow you to add some expression to your artwork. Okay, so that's pretty much it. I'm just gonna quickly sprint through this to finish off, so that we can get to the good stuff. And by good stuff, I mean the detailed article that I wrote about this. So this detailed article is going to include some links if you're interested in other drawing tutorials that I do, and I also have some links if you're interested for picking up this tablet that I'm using as well. Comments on the tablet. I think it's a really wonderful presentation. You know, when I opened up the box, it was super well presented. Everything from the instructions to the install was very simple. I really enjoyed the fact that I could get started drawing in a matter of minutes, whereas with other tablets that I've used, it took a little bit longer to set up. It was a little bit less intuitive. This is something that, even if you're brand new to digital drawing, this tablet is great for just getting started. And if there's other things that you want to do, let's say you feel more comfortable drawing on the screen, well, luckily, XP Pen has those types as well. They're a little bit more expensive, but if you're looking for a nice, cost-effective solution for this type of drawing practice, the Deco is a really good model to choose from. So I hope that you enjoyed this tutorial. I usually like to impart some kind of some kind of a nature factoid. So let's give you this before we leave. One interesting thing about the blue jay in particular, and this is something I noticed during the winter months, not even in the autumn, last winter, they have this little pouch inside of their throat. So I watched a bluebird take an entire acorn into its mouth and swallow it basically. And I was surprised that it didn't choke to death. But apparently, what happens is blue jays will, similar to squirrels, they will hoard nuts, acorns, all kinds of things to store them for food. And oftentimes, what happens is these birds will not remember where they buried certain things. And that's kind of how the forest plants itself. It depends on these types of animals and other factors for spreading the seeds out. So since the acorn basically an oak seed, right? The blue jay is one of the key characters that plays a crucial role in the propagation of the oak species. And there are other birds that do similar things too, like the woodpecker, for example. There's an acorn woodpecker on the west coast of the United States that embeds its acorns into trees. So it'll drill holes and then it'll embed acorns and other nuts into the trees. And these are usually dead standing trees. So that's perfect fuel for starting a new plant. And I just thought it was so cool how a creature that we take for granted every single day has such an important job. And another cool little factoid about the blue jay is that they don't mind the winter. So whilst other birds will migrate according to the seasons, the blue jays will stick around. So here is a quick digital tutorial for how to draw with a digital tablet. And I encourage you to get out and draw in nature, right? So get out there and bring a sketchbook with you, and you can start your drawings out in the field and see what you learn from your drawing. The whole point of nature drawing is to spend time and to learn from your observations. So essentially, when you come back home, you could finish your drawing and you could even tell people what you learned by sharing your drawing with them. I thought that, I think that's the coolest thing about nature drawing in general. So, anyway, hope this was helpful. If you have any questions, shoot me an email and you can reach me at james@hikeanddraw.nyc. Thank you very much and have a good day.